This episode is sponsored by Squarespace. Whether you need a domain, website, or online store, make your next move with Squarespace. A couple of weeks back, I was woken up at about 5 o'clock in the morning by a phone call, and on the other end was a night worker at the care home where my grandmother was being taken care of. And she called to tell me that unfortunately, half an hour before she called, my grandmother had passed away. Now, my grandmother, her name was Dorothy, but we all used to call her Emmy because apparently grandmothers the world over pick up these nicknames. She was genuinely one of the nicest people I've ever met. All she cared about in the world were the people who were closest to her, and she would never say a bad word nor hear a bad word said about anybody who she loved. And she was a really important figure for me growing up as well. When I was young, my mom remarried, and the man that she married didn't really want to have to deal with kids from a previous marriage, which as an adult I can completely understand, but at the time that was quite confusing. And at 9 years old, I was sent away to go to boarding school on my own in the UK, while the rest of my family were living back in Southern Africa. I'm sure it wasn't meant this way, but at that age, I really felt like an inconvenience, and I thought to myself that that's why I was being sent away, and that left me feeling very confused and lonely, a little bit rootless, and very confused about where I belonged in this world. The saving grace for me in those years was my grandmother Emmy, because on some weekends I was allowed to travel up to Birmingham to go and stay in her little flat, and from the minute that I walked in through the door, she made sure that I felt loved and cared for, and maybe even a little spoiled. Soon after arriving, she would walk me down to the high street to go and get supplies, and she would make me hold her hand. I now know, obviously, it's because she didn't want me to walk into traffic, but she pretended it was to help pull her along because she wanted to learn how to walk faster, and she made up these little stories. And we would go down to the shops and we'd pick up usually a McDonald's Happy Meal, a big 2-litre bottle of red, fizzy, sweet, carbonated goodness she used to call cherry pop, and a whole treasure trove of sweets. And our supply run also often included a trip to W.H. Smith's to go pick up a film on a VHS tape. Yes, kids, I'm old. And that's actually the first time I remember watching the original Star Wars trilogies, was buying it at the newsagents with my grandmother Emmy to take back to her flat and watch. And anytime I watch Star Wars these days, she always comes to mind. And then when we got back, she would tell me to go into the bedroom and to grab the duvet off the bed and bring it into the lounge so I could curl up in it on the sofa, which I was never allowed to do at home, so that was a special treat. And she would break out the sweets and the McDonald's Happy Meals, and she put the film in, and she would sit there and watch the film with me, even though there's no way she could have been interested in Star Wars. She just seemed to be happy for us to spend time together. I'm not embarrassed to say that I'm in my 40s now, and still when times are getting tough, I find myself doing the same thing, grabbing a blanket, lying down on the sofa, putting a good film in, and eating things I probably shouldn't be eating just because they're comforting. And I'm always transported right back to being taken good care of by my grandmother Emmy, where she created this safe space for me as a child. And at that age where I was struggling to find my place in this world, I desperately needed that safe space where I felt like I belonged, I would be taken care of, and I was loved no matter what, and made to feel special. And because of that, her tiny little humble flat in Birmingham became my very favorite place in the world. No one in my life has shown me the kind of unconditional love that she showed me, and I will always remember her for that and be incredibly grateful for how she helped me through especially that difficult time in my life. And even though she lived to the ripe age of 96 before she passed away, her loss is still a tough one to take, and I will dearly miss her presence in this world. Since her passing, I've done what most of us do, and I've gone around trying to find every photograph of her I can so I can keep them in a safe place and pull them out anytime I want to bring her back fresh in my memory. I've heard it said that people die twice, once when their heart stops beating, and again the last time someone says their name. And when I thought about that idea, that quote, that little bit of philosophy, I thought that's also true of photographs, because we use photographs to pull them out and to reconjure the memory of that person and to bring them back into our mind as if they were still with us. As I was collecting all these images together and looking through them and reliving memories though, the photographer in me jumped up in the back of my mind somewhere, and I did have this thought for a second These photographs are all technically awful. And then I thought to myself, but you know what? It doesn't matter, because these now are photos that are more precious to me than any photograph I have in my professional portfolio. They also elicit more of a response from me than looking at the work of any of my favorite photographers, or even any of the photography greats whose work we're all supposed to collectively revere. But interestingly to me, they also elicited more of a response from you than the work that I normally share. On the day she passed away, I posted this image of my brother and I in a ski lift with Emmy when we were just kids, and it got more interaction and comments on it than any of the other images I had posted recently. And it got me thinking, do we as photographers, especially those of us who make this art form a career, make photography about all the wrong things sometimes? I couldn't care less what camera was used or what film stock they were taken on, whether the lighting was any good or the exposure was correct, whether the composition was on point, or whether the shot was even in focus, which, by the way, a lot of those shots aren't in focus. What's important to me now, and why those images are so precious to me today, are because they help me to preserve the memory of someone I love dearly. And surely that's one of the great powers of photography, its ability to freeze moments with those who mean the most to us. I mean, there are so many creative ways that photography is used today, and I love it all and respect the many and various ways that talented artists are using this medium around the world. But for me, there is nothing quite as evocative as photography's ability to freeze in time and help us to remember those who were closest to us. So I hope this video serves as a brief reminder not to get so caught up in the technical side of photography that we forget that one of the real powers of this medium is to help us to keep the memories of our loved ones alive, to stretch out the time between that first and that second death by decades, if not centuries. Who cares what aperture you use, what shutter speed, or what ISO? Photograph your loved ones a lot. Take good photographs of them if you can manage, but if you can't, just take a load of bad photographs of them, because you never know when the day will arrive that that's all you have left of them. And all this has just served to remind me that this is one of the real gifts that photography gives us. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this episode. If you need a new website or a domain, they're a fantastic option. I've used them myself for over a decade now as my website of choice. I really like a clean and minimal design on my website because I want my work to do the talking and I don't want the design to distract. But I'm no designer, I just know that minimalism is a hard thing to do well. But Squarespace have a whole host of templates put together by professional designers that help you stay within those boundaries. They're really easy to use. You just drag in text blocks and photos and videos, and then when it's presented on the front end, it's a clean and minimal space where your work does the talking. Start your free trial today at squarespace.com and go to squarespace.com/Sean Tucker to get 10% off your first purchase.